The idea that things can turn into snakes doesn't sit well with me. I'm not very fond of snakes, not at all. When we lived in Cameroon, we were bringing the washing in, and as we picked up a sheet from the ground, a bed sheet that had fallen from the washing line, we picked up the sheet and out fell a black mamba. Admittedly, it was a baby black mamba, but neither the babies nor the adults make good bedfellows, and so I ran, and I think that had Usain Bolt been running alongside me, I might have won. The idea that something could turn into a snake, whether a stick or even a bedsheet, is something that perhaps not many of us have experienced. But when we lived in Cameroon, I was driving from Kumba to Boya, and as I was driving into the town of Boya, which is on the slopes of Mount Cameroon, there were police everywhere. Now, I don't know what it is, but police seem to be very attractive to me. If I go through airport security, they tend to stop me and inspect me. If I'm in the train station in Italy, they ask me for my identity, and once I'd forgotten my ID, and they nearly arrested me, because it's a crime not to have ID with you. And so, in Cameroon, it was no different. As I drove in my car, I was often pulled over by the police, who asked me to present my driving licence and various other things. And on this particular day, as I saw the police officers in the town on the outskirts of Boya, on the slopes of Mount Cameroon, I realised I'd forgotten my driving licence. Oh dear, I was worried that I'd be in big trouble. But the police seemed preoccupied with something else. In fact, there seemed to be people all over the road, and there were lots of police everywhere, and it wasn't immediately clear how to drive forward because there were so many people running around, and it seems that the university students had all started coming onto the road, and there was tear gas. There was tear gas on the road, and as I went forward, the police weren't interested in me. They were interested in the students who were throwing stones at a building. So I managed to get through, and I didn't get stopped, luckily, because I hadn't got my documents. And I got to my friend's house, and I said to him, "What is going on? Why are the police there? Why is the tear gas? Why are the students throwing stones at that building?" And my friend said to me, he said, "I would tell you, but you won't believe me, so I'm not going to." Perplexed, I went to bed, but the next morning I looked for a newspaper, and the newspaper had a headline that was difficult for me to digest. In fact, I nearly coughed up my cornflakes. As I read the headline, "Man kidnaps student for occultic practices." So the man had kidnapped a student from the university, taken her to a hotel, and then something, it said, happened. The newspaper said this: the man turned into a python and tried to eat the girl. Incredible. I won't tell you that I believed it. In fact, 100 or even 1,000 thoughts came to my mind, and I was really thinking, well, how do I react to this newspaper? I thought, I'll ask some friends. So I asked a university lecturer who worked at that university. I said, "Can you tell me what went on the other day?" He repeated the same thing that the newspaper had said. I asked a local person who was actually a church member and worked for the police. He said the same thing. A man kidnapped a girl to do occultic practices, transformed into a python, and tried to eat her. incredible. When I started reading the text today, and I read that Aaron threw his stick on the ground and became a snake, I must say, as somebody who grew up in England, who was trained from childhood to reject such stories, I must say that my initial reaction on reading these kinds of Bible passages is one of disbelief. It's as though I have some sort of allergy to miracles, a kind of principle that I should dismiss anything supernatural. It's as though this principle that I should dismiss anything miraculous is ingrained in the way I was formed as a person. 300 years ago, David Hume, the philosopher, the Scottish philosopher, said this: if somebody tells you they've seen a miracle, if 1,000 people tell you they've seen a miracle, don't believe them. It's far more likely that all of those people are lying than that miracle, that contradiction of the laws of physics, took place. So David Hume says, if we hear something like I heard in Boya, on the slopes of Cameroon's mountain, if we hear something like that, we should just dismiss it. Equally, many biblical scholars, following David Hume and other people like him, dismiss the miraculous components of the Bible. Indeed, if I was to collect all of the Bible commentaries that I consulted before preaching on this passage, I must say, out of 20 that I own, I couldn't find one that gave me an easy introduction to what is going on. What is it that makes us struggle to believe that God can do something in this world? If I pick up this Bible, am I not interrupting the laws of gravity in some way? Am I not interfering? If I drop the book, it falls. If I drop something, it falls. But my action in lifting this Bible, it does have an influence on what is happening. If I, a young man from Leicestershire, can influence the physical world, is it too hard to believe that the God who created heaven and earth, the God who supposedly we believe is almighty, the God who can do anything, if I can influence the physical, are we saying that we can't believe that God can influence the physical? It's something that many of us may struggle with, but I want to ask you another question. Is it that you struggle to believe this particular story, that the stick turned into a snake, or is it that you struggle to believe that the supernatural exists at all? The Bible seems to be saturated with the supernatural. If we look, the Bible passage we read says three things. One, the supernatural is real. Spiritual forces can influence the physical. And that point is right through the Bible. A more disturbing point is that the Egyptian magicians, Hatum, can influence through supernatural powers the physical. That means that there are spiritual forces that can be used by people who are not necessarily very nice. That means, as Star Wars would put it, there is a dark side. There is a dark side. Or as Lord of the Rings would call it, the forces of Sauron or Saruman. They are real in myth, of course, but we tend to dismiss all of this. We dismiss that the supernatural exists altogether. I was formed with such beliefs, to dismiss anything that seems to contradict the laws of nature. But what are the laws of nature? Is not physics a tradition? Is not the great treasure of modern science a tradition that has developed? Isaac Newton, who seems to be arguing, and very well in fact, that the laws of nature cannot be interrupted, who influenced indeed many of the biblical commentators on my shelves. Newton did not believe, it seems, that the laws of physics could be interrupted by something like that. But Newton's understanding of physics has been supplanted, not supplanted, but developed, edited, redacted. And so today we don't simply hold everything that Newton said. Einstein has said a number of things about physics. So if we look at the history and the development of physics, our understanding of the laws of nature, it has evolved. And I do not find anywhere a scientist who believes that we have completely understood everything that there is to know about the laws of nature. But back to the real point. Can God influence the physical? Can God influence what's going on around us? Well, if we don't believe that God has agency, if we don't believe that God can work in the physical, then we don't really believe in God, do we? Because if God isn't able to influence what's going on around us, then he's not really God. Maybe this is all a little bit too much, but I believe in miracles. I won't say that I believe every story that I hear, no way, but I do believe in miracles. I believe that God can do anything that God wants to do. If God created the physical world, if God created all these rules or procedures or operations in nature, God can influence them. How? I don't know. I don't pretend to know. But I know that in my life, God has done some things that I can't explain. My life is a miracle. My life is a miracle. I was at school. They told me I couldn't go to university. They said, there's no way you can go to university. You can't write an essay. The head of the sixth form college even said to me, I wouldn't advise it. You shouldn't go that way. It'll be too difficult for you. I was heavily dyslexic. I didn't know at the time, but later discovered that one of the big problems that I had was articulating on paper what I was thinking in my head. Of course, people helped me, lots of people, and I gradually overcome some of the challenges and managed to make progress, even going to university. But I believe very firmly that the turning point was when I asked God to enter my mind and my heart and help me. I believe in miracles. I can't tell you all of them now, but I think, as Einstein said, there are two ways to look at this life. One is as though nothing is a miracle. The other is as though everything is a miracle. Amen. Who is this divides the sea, makes kingdoms fall and wars to the seas? Who is this who calls my name? If I